The man was buried alive by a mudslide, so he rolled down the window trying to feel how thick the mud was. But the moment he reached out, a flood of wet mud gushed into the car. Terrified, he quickly rolled the window back up. Before he could catch his breath, the sunroof suddenly cracked open. Panicking, he grabbed some duct tape and tried to seal the glass. But the thin tape couldn't withstand the pressure of the heavy mud. Just when it seemed like he would be buried alive, the man noticed a steering wheel lock under the seat. Thinking fast, he yanked it out and wedged it diagonally against the sunroof. To his surprise, the forgotten lock actually held back the mud. He swallowed hard, staring nervously at the glass, fearing it would shatter at any second. When he saw that the lock really held firm, he finally relaxed and let out a long sigh of relief. But that moment of relief led to the dumbest mistake of his life. He grabbed a bottle of water and gulped it down greedily. Only when it was nearly empty did he realize he had almost finished his only supply of drinking water. Regret and panic set in. Buried under tons of mud, he had no idea how long he'd be trapped. Without water, his chances of survival would drop fast. But since there was no turning back, he finished the rest in one go. Then he searched the car for anything useful, tools, materials, and anything that could help him survive. But nothing seemed to work. Just then, he noticed a few drops of water seeping through the sunroof. He rushed over, pressed his mouth against the spot, and sucked eagerly. Realizing it was too slow, he took out his wallet, pulled a credit card, and folded it into a funnel. He stuck it into a plastic bottle and wedged it under the lock. Soon, the dripping water filled the bottle. His thirst problem was solved, and he clapped his hands in excitement. After that, he even urinated into the storage box to keep for later use. But not long after, breathing became difficult. The air inside the car was running out. If he didn't act soon, he would suffocate. So he grabbed his camping chair and pulled out a hollow metal pole. Then he removed a bottle cap, drilled a small hole with a nail clipper, tied a knot on a piece of twine, threaded it through the cap, and stuffed it into the pole. Pleased with his ingenuity, he put on gloves and straightened a piece of wire. He used it to drill a tiny hole in the sunroof, then shoved the pole upward with all his strength. But the mud was dense, far thicker than he expected. The entire 1-meter pole couldn't even reach the surface. Panic started creeping in. He connected a second pole, using the same trick, and pushed it upward again. Still, even 2 poles weren't enough. His breathing grew heavier. The lack of oxygen was unbearable. Desperate, he connected the last pole and pushed with all his might. But this time, it hit something solid and refused to go further. He screamed in frustration and grabbed a car jack, trying to push the poles up mechanically. But the jack soon reached its limit, and the poles still didn't break through. Determined, he stuffed a towel on his shoulder, braced his body under the pole, and pushed upward with every bit of strength he had. Suddenly, he felt the resistance give way. The pole broke through the surface. Excited, he inserted the wire, punched open the sealed cap, and peeked through the tube. When he saw a faint glimmer of light, he shouted in joy, and even greeted the tiny hole like a friend. Overwhelmed with emotion, he pressed his lips against the opening and greedily inhaled the fresh air. It felt like being reborn. Then he began searching the car again for something that could draw attention. An idea struck him. He grabbed an old newspaper, rolled it into a strip, and lit it with a match near the pole's opening, hoping the smoke would rise through the tube and be seen by rescuers. But he underestimated the danger of fire in a sealed car. The flames burned his fingers, and he reflexively dropped the paper. That made things worse. The fire spread instantly. By the time he tried to put it out, it was too late. Thick smoke filled the car, and he covered his nose and mouth with his shirt. Moments later, he passed out from suffocation. Fortunately, the smoke drifted out through the pole, and with little oxygen left in the car, the flames soon died out. Against all odds, the man survived, barely. Not long after, it began to rain outside. The mud flowed down the poles and clogged the pipe opening. Panicking, the man tried to clear it with a wire, but the falling pole slashed his forehead, and the pain made him pass out. When he woke up, most of the sunroof had been crushed by the mud. Half of the car was buried under wet soil, and the poles were completely blocked. The wound on his head throbbed painfully, and he screamed in agony. Blood kept pouring out. He tore off his shirt and wrapped it around the wound. Then he pulled out his belt and tightened it over the shirt to stop the bleeding. When the pain finally eased, he noticed a small bird buried alive in the mud. The sight made him realize that if he didn't act soon, he would end up just like that bird. Suddenly, more mud started pouring down again. The man let out a desperate roar, grabbed some cloth, and tried to plug the cracks in the sunroof. But it didn't help at all. He broke down in tears, unwilling to accept his fate. He didn't want to die like this. But soon, his despair turned into numb resignation. He picked up his phone and tried to stay calm as he recorded a farewell message for his girlfriend. After that, he drifted off to sleep. In his dream, he saw himself driving when the mudslide swept his car down the mountain. When he woke up, his will to survive reignited. He realized that although he was buried deep, the soil around him was soft and loose. So he grabbed a flashlight and looked for another way out. But before he could act, the roof suddenly gave in under pressure. In panic, he pulled out the poles and used them to brace the root, keeping himself from being crushed alive. Thankfully, it worked, and he narrowly escaped death. After catching his breath, he filled a bottle with urine and drank it eagerly, gulping it down as if it were the sweetest thing in the world. When the bottle was empty, he still wasn't satisfied. He poured all the leftover snacks into his mouth, licking every last crumb with his tongue. Once his strength returned, he grabbed the spare tire and connected it to an air hose. Seeing there was still some oxygen inside, he didn't hesitate. He stripped off his clothes and covered his body with a layer of engine oil. Then he gripped the pole tightly, smashed through the cracked sunroof, and crawled into the dark, damp mud. He dug upward with the pole, using his back to brace the soil behind him to keep it from collapsing and burying him alive. Even though he was mentally prepared, every second of climbing was pure torture. The suffocating darkness alone was enough to drive anyone insane. After crawling less than a meter, he suddenly felt weak and short of breath. He grabbed a straw and sucked air from the spare tire, finally managing to catch his breath again. He started encouraging himself, telling himself that he only needed to hold on a little longer to get out. Calming down, he kept digging, using the floor mat and poles to support his weight. To his surprise, the mud on both sides stopped sliding down. That gave him new confidence. If nothing went wrong, he would make it out soon. But suddenly, the soil above his head loosened. Before he could react, a massive wave of mud poured down on him like a waterfall. He was completely buried alive. No one knew how long it took, but slowly, a few fingers broke through the surface. Fueled by his will to survive, he held his breath and clawed his way out of the dirt. He pushed his head through the soil, spitting out mud and gasping for air. Because the soil was soft, he had been given one last chance to live. After catching his breath, he struggled to push away the dirt above his head, and in the next second, he saw the most beautiful sunlight of his entire life. Overjoyed, he reached his hand toward it. He survived.